For nearly 3 decades, the former military citadel known as Alcatraz stood as the final destination for America's most dangerous criminals. Isolated by the bone-chilling waters and treacherous currents of the San Francisco Bay, it was the ultimate federal penitentiary, a cold, unyielding monolith of steel and concrete. It was the place you went when every other prison had failed. The system within was a masterpiece of monotonous control. The cell blocks A, B, C, and the critical D block were a maze of locked doors and armed galleries. The environment was designed to crush the spirit, leaving no room for hope or, more importantly, escape. Yet in the spring of 1946, just as the world was celebrating peace, a different kind of war was brewing on the Rock. Our focus is on Bernard Coy, prisoner 415. On the outside, he was a skilled bank robber and marksman. On the inside, he was an expert observer. He was methodical, patient, and, for a time, a model prisoner, earning the coveted but low-security role of library orderly. This provided him with vital access to the daily routines, specifically those of the lone guard in the center of D Block, who held the keys to freedom. Coy's plan was built on a single, almost theatrical moment of physical prowess and a profound security flaw. He knew the guard routine. He knew the bars were slick. He would need speed, strength, and audacity. The reward? Weapons and the open gate of the recreation yard. The risk? Death. But for men serving life, death was often a preferred outcome. Coy recruited 3 key accomplices: the volatile, desperate Joseph Dutch Kreitzer, the powerful, unhesitating Marvin Hubbard, and the youngest, Clarence Carnes, a man with a slight chance at parole if he stayed clean. On the afternoon of May 2nd, 1946, the meticulous plan began. At precisely 2:15 p.m., Officer William Miller entered the D Block corridor. Coy and Hubbard moved in a synchronized blur. Officer Miller was quickly subdued and relieved of the enormous keyring. It was the first successful armed takeover of the Alcatraz main cell block in history. Now for the impossible. Coy stripped down and covered his body with axle grease to reduce friction. He then began his ascent, scaling the slick 30-foot vertical tool-proof bars of the cell tiers like a human spider. This was the moment of truth. He successfully reached the lightly protected West Gun Gallery, overpowering Officer Bird Birch. The convicts now had access to a Springfield rifle, an M1911 pistol, and a supply of ammunition. Coy tossed the weapons down to his accomplices. The group quickly secured 8 prison guards as hostages, locking them into cells C402 and C403. The escape was now down to one final, pivotal moment: opening the main recreation yard door.
The inmates converged on the yard door. They slid the proper key from the heavy ring into the lock, and nothing happened. The lock was jammed. Frantically, they tried again. The key would not turn. What the inmates didn't know was that Officer William Miller, even as he lay subdued, had managed a truly heroic act of defiance. He had quickly palmed the vital recreation yard key, a key Coy had missed, and had dropped it into a nearby toilet. Even if the key had been found, the mechanism of the lock itself had seized up. The escape plan had failed, derailed by one tiny piece of steel. The convicts were trapped. They controlled the cell block, but they were sealed inside. Rage and desperation took over, especially among two opportunistic inmates who had joined the fray, Sam Shockley and Miriam Thompson. They urged Kretzer to eliminate the witnesses, to kill the officers. At approximately 5 p.m., Joseph Kretzer yielded to the bloodlust. He raised his pistol and fired multiple rounds into the cells holding the officers. The officers, including Miller and Officer Harold Stites, collapsed, severely wounded. The riot was officially a bloody mutiny. Remarkably, the guards, though grievously injured, had the presence of mind to collapse and play dead, a desperate gamble that saved the lives of 6 of them.
Warden James A. Johnston, a man who prided himself on control, was facing an unprecedented crisis. With armed convicts controlling the central artery of his prison, the situation demanded immediate, decisive action. Knowing his remaining prison staff were outmatched, Johnston made a historic call. He contacted the nearby Treasure Island Naval Station. They dispatched 2 platoons of United States Marines. These were not military police. These were combat veterans, many fresh from the island-hopping campaigns of the Pacific. They were men who understood how to deal with an entrenched, desperate, and deadly enemy. The Marine detachment was led by Warrant Officer Charles Lafayette Buckner. His forces were swiftly deployed, establishing secure firing positions on the roof of D Block. For Buckner, this was no riot. It was an engagement. His strategy would be swift and overwhelming. An attempt by a few brave, unarmed officers to rescue the wounded hostages was quickly repulsed. The tragic result? Officer Harold Stites, a veteran, was killed by the inmates' fire. The death of a second officer sealed the prison's fate. Alcatraz had truly become a battleground.
Intense, focusing on military tactics, but medium. The battle raged throughout the night and into the second day. The convicts, Coy, Kretzer, and Hubbard, had retreated into the dark, labyrinthine utility corridors behind the cells. They used the heavy steel cell blocks as cover, firing blindly into the hallways. Warrant Officer Buckner saw an opportunity and ordered his Marines to exploit it. He directed his men to target the roof and outer walls of D Block, using their M1 Garand rifles and Thompson submachine guns. But the key was a truly brutal tactic: the liberal deployment of hand grenades. The Marines funneled an estimated 500 concussion and fragmentation grenades through ventilation openings and roof ports. This was the same relentless, overwhelming strategy used against entrenched Japanese positions. The detonations were deafening, the shrapnel devastating. The cell block was virtually reduced to rubble. The intense bombardment had the desired effect. The inmates were dislodged, concussed, and panicked. Their positions became untenable. They were forced into the corridor's dead end. At approximately 9:45 a.m. on May 4th, the prison staff, led by Associate Warden E.J. Miller, launched a final, decisive assault. Coy, Kretzer, and Hubbard met their end in a final, savage exchange of gunfire. Their bodies were found riddled with bullets, closing the bloody chapter of the Battle of Alcatraz.
The cost of the 3-day siege was heavy. 3 inmates dead, 2 officers killed, and 14 officers seriously wounded. The prison itself was physically scarred, a silent witness to the war fought within its walls. Justice moved swiftly for the remaining participants. Sam Shockley and Miriam Thompson, convicted of first-degree murder for encouraging the attack on the hostages, were sent to the gas chamber at San Quentin. Clarence Carnes, the youngest, was spared the death penalty due to his refusal to fire on the officers, eventually earning parole decades later. The Battle of Alcatraz proved a chilling truth. No prison, no matter how secure, is truly immune to the lethal cocktail of desperation and planning. It was a stark reminder of the thin line between civilization and chaos, and the extraordinary measures sometimes required to restore order. The Marines, true to their duty, received little formal recognition for their service. Yet they performed a vital function, bringing their combat training home to prevent an American prison riot from escalating into a full-scale catastrophe. Alcatraz would continue to operate for another 17 years before finally closing its doors in 1963. But for historians and all who study The Rock, the legacy is sealed. The Battle of Alcatraz remains the most violent, pivotal event in the history of America's most notorious prison.